Commander Marcus Chen walked into the giant meeting room on Nexus Prime. The room was huge, with walls that seemed to go up forever. Alien beings from all over the galaxy sat in curved rows, looking down at the speaking area in the center. Their various eyes, sensors, and other body parts all turned toward Marcus as he stepped forward. Marcus was not a tall man, but he stood straight and proud. His uniform was simple compared to the fancy clothes worn by the other species. He carried a small device in his hand that would show his information to everyone in the room. The room buzzed with different sounds. Some aliens made clicking noises, others hummed, and a few made sounds that humans could not even hear properly. But Marcus could feel their mood. They were not taking him seriously. Chairman Vextar was a being made of living crystal. He stood twice as tall as Marcus and sparkled with inner light. His voice sounded like wind chimes when he spoke. "Commander Chen from Terra," Vextar said. "You have requested this emergency meeting. Please share your concerns." Marcus pressed a button on his device. The air above him filled with moving pictures made of light. They showed star maps, ship movements, and battle formations. Red dots marked enemy positions across dozens of star systems. "Thank you, Chairman," Marcus said. His voice was steady and clear. "For the past 3 months, our deep space monitors have detected unusual activity in the Outer Rim territories. The Zephyrian Empire is moving large numbers of warships to attack positions." The hologram changed to show a timeline. Ship after ship appeared on the display, all moving toward the same areas where peaceful alien colonies lived. "Based on our analysis," Marcus continued, "the Zephyrians are preparing for a coordinated assault on at least 6 different worlds. The attack will likely happen within the next 2 weeks. A sound like angry buzzing filled the room. Ambassador Thylix from the Centauri Federation stood up. She was tall and thin, with blue skin that glowed softly. Her 4 arms moved as she spoke, showing her annoyance. "Commander Chen," Thylix said, her voice cold, "your species has been part of our alliance for only 5 years. Perhaps you do not understand how galactic politics work. The Zephyrians are traders, not warriors. They buy and sell goods across the galaxy." More sounds came from around the room. Some aliens were clicking in what seemed like laughter. Others made whistling noises that Marcus had learned meant they thought someone was being foolish. The Hive Queen Zakth rose from her seat. She looked like a giant insect with 6 legs and 4 arms. When she spoke, her voice came from speakers because humans could not hear her natural sounds. "Small mammal shows fear thinking," Zakth said through her translator. "Human species sees violence where none exists. This is known trait of primitive minds." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm. "With respect, Hive Queen, our intelligence networks have tracked Zephyrian ship movements for months. They are not following trade routes. They are moving into attack formations." He changed the hologram again. Now it showed detailed battle plans with arrows and tactical positions. "Look at these patterns," Marcus said. "Classic pincer movements. Feint attacks here and here while the main force strikes here. This is not trade. This is war preparation." Ambassador Krelon from the Ashari Collective floated up from his seat. The Ashari looked like jellyfish but could think and speak. His translator made his words sound musical. "Dear Commander Chen," Krelon sang, "your species comes from a world of constant conflict. You see enemies everywhere because fighting is what you know best. But the galaxy has moved beyond such primitive thinking. We solve problems with words, not weapons." More sounds of agreement came from around the room. Marcus looked at each speaker, memorizing their faces and names. These were supposed to be his allies. "The Zephyrians have conquered 47 different species in the past 1,000 years, Marcus said. "Every single time they use the same tactics. They build up forces slowly, then attack without warning. The conquered species become slaves or are wiped out completely." Chairman Vextar's crystal body flashed brighter. Commander Chen, you speak of ancient history. The Zephyrian Empire signed peace treaties with all major galactic powers 200 years ago. They have honored these agreements. Because they were not strong enough to break them, Marcus replied. But our intelligence shows they have been building new ships and weapons in secret. They are ready to fight now. The room erupted in various alien sounds of disagreement. Some delegates stood up and started talking to each other instead of listening to Marcus. Ambassador Thylix raised one of her 4 hands for silence. Commander Chen, she said, perhaps Earth would benefit from better education about galactic affairs. The Zephyrians are our trade partners. We will not insult them based on human paranoia. Marcus felt heat rise in his face, but he kept his anger controlled. He had expected this reaction. Humans were new to galactic politics, and the older species treated them like children who did not understand how the universe really worked. I am not asking you to insult anyone, Marcus said. I am asking you to prepare defenses, just in case I am right. Hive Queen Zakth made a sound that her translator turned into scornful laughter. Human species wants to play warrior games. We will not waste resources on mammal fears. Chairman Vextar struck his crystal staff against the floor. The sound rang through the room like a giant bell, calling for order. The Galactic Defense Council has heard Commander Chen's concerns, Vextar announced. After consideration, we find no evidence of immediate threat from the Zephyrian Empire. This matter is tabled indefinitely. Marcus gathered his device and straightened his uniform. He had done his duty and warned them. Now he had to do what humans always did when their allies would not listen. He had to save them anyway. As Marcus walked toward the exit, he pressed a hidden button on his device. A message went out on an encrypted channel that only other humans could receive. Nightfall protocol is authorized, he said quietly. We do this alone. Behind him, he could still hear the aliens making their various sounds of amusement. They thought the primitive humans were being foolish again. Marcus knew they would stop laughing very soon. Administrator Thane Raylox was drinking his morning coffee when the alarm started screaming. His office window looked out over Kepler Station's main docking bays, where merchant ships usually came and went in peaceful routine. But what he saw now made his coffee cup fall from his hands and shatter on the floor. Space was full of ships. Not the curved, beautiful vessels of the Galactic Alliance, but sharp, deadly Zephyrian warships. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They appeared out of hyperspace like angry metal wasps, their dark hulls gleaming under the light of Kepler's sun. Thane's assistant, a young Ashari named Gelwyn, floated into the room with panic in her musical voice. Administrator, we are receiving emergency signals from all sectors. The Zephyrians are attacking everywhere at once. Before Thane could answer, the station shook. The lights flickered as something hit the outer defensive shields. Through his window, he could see bright flashes as Kepler Station's automated defense systems came online. Plasma cannons emerged from hidden positions and began firing at the approaching enemy ships. The Zephyrian vessels moved like a school of fish, turning and diving in perfect coordination. Their shields glowed as the station's weapons hit them, but the plasma bolts seemed to have no effect. The enemy ships kept coming, and their own weapons began to fire back. How is this possible? Thane whispered. The Ashari defense grid is the most advanced in the galaxy. Gelwyn was frantically working at her control panel, her tentacle-like fingers dancing over the controls. The Zephyrian shields are adapting, Administrator. Every time our weapons hit them, their protection becomes stronger against that type of energy. More explosions rocked the station. Thane watched in horror as one of the defense platforms exploded in a ball of fire. Then another. The Zephyrians were not just adapting to the weapons, they were learning how to destroy them completely. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on 6 different worlds. On Centauri Prime, Admiral Velthar stood on the bridge of his flagship as Zephyrian forces tore through his patrol fleet. The Centauri were proud of their military traditions, but their tactics were thousands of years old. They formed neat battle lines and fired in organized volleys, just as their ancestors had done. The Zephyrians ignored these ancient rules of war. Their ships attacked from above and below, from angles that Centauri military doctrine said were impossible. When Velthar's ships tried to turn to face them, the Zephyrians were already somewhere else, striking from a new direction. "Send a distress signal to the Galactic Defense Council," Velthar ordered, as another of his ships exploded. "Request immediate assistance from all Allied fleets." But the council chambers on Nexus Prime were in chaos. Chairman Vextar's crystal body was flashing rapidly between different colors, a sign of extreme distress. Emergency messages were flooding in from every corner of the Alliance. Ambassador Thylix stood at her communication station, her 4 arms working frantically to coordinate responses. But there was nothing to coordinate. The carefully planned defense agreements between species meant nothing when those species were under attack at the same time. "The Hive Queen's outer colonies have gone silent," Thylix reported. "We have lost contact with 12 different worlds." Hive Queen Zaxth made sounds of distress that her translator could barely convert into words. "Impossible thing happens. Zephyrian species attacks all places at once time. My warriors cannot defend everywhere places." The truth was becoming clear to everyone in the council chambers. The Zephyrians had been planning this attack for years, maybe decades. While the Galactic Alliance had been celebrating peace and prosperity, their enemies had been preparing for war. Back on Kepler Station, Thane watched as the first Zephyrian boarding pods smashed through the station's hull. They cut through the metal walls like they were made of paper, not the advanced alloys that were supposed to protect the station's inhabitants. Zephyrian soldiers poured out of the pods. They moved quickly and efficiently, their weapons cutting down anyone who tried to resist. Thane had never seen a Zephyrian up close before. They were tall and thin, with gray skin that seemed to absorb light. Their eyes were large and dark, and they moved with the cold precision of machines. "Administrator," Gelwyn said, her voice now barely a whisper, "what do we do?" Before Thane could answer, all the communication screens in his office lit up at once. A single transmission was cutting through all the emergency signals and panic messages. The voice that came through the speakers was calm, professional, and completely human. "This is General Sarah Voss of the Terran Expeditionary Force," the voice said. "All Allied vessels, clear the combat zones immediately. We are coming through." Thane stared at the screen. Terran Expeditionary Force? I have never heard of such a thing. On his tactical display, new contacts were appearing. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace near all the battle zones. But these were not the elegant vessels of the Galactic Alliance. They were angular, scarred, and built for fighting. Human ships. The transmission continued. "To all Zephyrian forces, you have exactly 1 hour to withdraw from Alliance territory. This is your only warning." Across the galaxy, Zephyrian commanders received the same message. High Admiral Kethvar, leader of the invasion fleet, stood on the bridge of his flagship and laughed. His species had conquered 47 different worlds. They had crushed armies, destroyed fleets, and broken the will of entire civilizations. "Who are these humans to threaten us?" he asked his subordinates. "They are the youngest species in the Alliance. They have been in space for less than 200 years. His intelligence officer, a nervous Zephyrian named Yethkar, looked at the tactical readings with confusion. "Admiral, the human ships are spreading out to protect all the targeted worlds simultaneously. They do not have enough vessels to mount an effective defense." Kethvar made a sound that was the Zephyrian equivalent of laughter. "Then they will die quickly. Continue the attack." But something felt different now. The panicked emergency transmissions from the Alliance worlds had stopped. Instead, there was organized chatter on the communication frequencies, human voices coordinating movements, sharing information and giving orders. On Kepler Station, Thane watched as the first human warship engaged a Zephyrian cruiser. The human vessel was smaller and less advanced, but it fought differently than any ship he had ever seen. Instead of following standard attack patterns, it moved unpredictably, striking from unexpected angles. When the Zephyrian ship's adaptive shields began to resist the humans' energy weapons, the human ship switched to physical projectiles. When those were blocked, it tried something else. It never stopped adapting, never stopped trying new approaches. The Zephyrian cruiser, designed to adapt to any single type of attack, could not keep up with an enemy that kept changing its methods every few seconds. For the first time since the attack began, a Zephyrian ship was forced to retreat. Thane realized that the humans had been preparing for this day just as much as the Zephyrians had. But while the Zephyrians had prepared with technology and superior numbers, the humans had prepared with something else entirely. They had prepared to fight a war that everyone else thought would never come. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the destroyer Indomitable as it dove through a formation of Zephyrian warships. Around her, alien fleets were retreating in disorder, their captains confused by an enemy that seemed to ignore every rule of civilized warfare. But Elena was not confused. She was hunting. "Target their sensor arrays first," she called to her weapons officer. "Jenkins, I want those ships blind before they know what hit them." The Indomitable was not the most beautiful ship in space. Its hull was scarred from previous battles, and its weapons were older models that other species had stopped using years ago. But Elena's crew had been fighting together for 5 years, and they knew their ship better than they knew their own families. "Captain," her sensor officer reported, "the Zephyrian cruiser is adapting its shields. Our plasma cannons are only doing minimal damage." Elena smiled. Other species would have continued firing the same weapons, hoping their superior technology would eventually break through. But humans had learned a long time ago that hope was not a battle plan. "Switch to kinetic rounds," she ordered. "Full spread. Target their engine section." The Indomitable's guns rotated and began firing solid metal projectiles instead of energy beams. The Zephyrian shields, designed to adapt to energy weapons, had no defense against chunks of metal moving at incredible speeds. The enemy cruiser's engines exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. "That's the thing about adaptation," Elena said to her crew. "You can only adapt to what you understand." Meanwhile, on Kepler Station, Colonel James Okafor was leading his soldiers through corridors filled with smoke and emergency lighting. The 101st Drop Battalion had arrived just as Zephyrian ground forces were taking control of the station's main sections. James moved carefully around a corner and held up his hand to stop his squad. Through the smoke, he could see 3 Zephyrian soldiers standing guard at an intersection. They wore armor that could stop most energy weapons, and they carried rifles that could cut through metal walls. Private Martinez whispered into her radio. "Colonel, we could use plasma grenades to clear them out." James shook his head. "Too loud. We need to be smarter than that." He pointed to Sergeant Kim and made hand signals. The sergeant nodded and disappeared into a maintenance shaft. James counted to 30, then threw a small metal object down the hallway. It bounced and rolled, making noise as it moved. The Zephyrian guards turned toward the sound, raising their weapons. At that moment, Sergeant Kim dropped from the ceiling behind them. Before they could turn around, all 3 guards were unconscious on the floor. "Zephyrians have conquered 47 species," James whispered to his team. "But every one of those species fought the same way. Stand in lines, fire weapons, hope for the best. They have never fought humans before." The 101st moved through the station like ghosts. When they encountered Zephyrian patrols, they used distractions, ambushes, and misdirection instead of direct attacks. When their enemies expected them to retreat, they advanced. When the Zephyrians set up defensive positions, the humans went around them. Corporal Davis had been an engineer before joining the army. When his squad ran out of ammunition, he showed them how to make explosives from cleaning supplies found in the station's maintenance areas. When those ran out, he taught them to build traps using the station's own systems against the invaders. "The beautiful thing about humans," Davis said as he rigged a door to electrocute anyone who opened it, "is that we are really good at improvising." Above Centauri Prime, Admiral Chen commanded a battle group that was outnumbered 10-1. Marcus Chen's younger brother had inherited the same ability to see patterns that others missed, but where Marcus was a diplomat, Admiral Chen was a warrior. The Centauri fleet had retreated after losing half their ships to Zephyrian tactics. But the human battle group moved forward, directly toward the enemy formation. "Admiral," his tactical officer said, "the Zephyrians are trying to surround us. Standard doctrine says we should withdraw to a better position." "Standard doctrine assumes the enemy thinks like we do," Chen replied. "But the Zephyrians have been using the same tactics for 1,000 years. They expect us to be predictable." Instead of retreating, Chen's ships split up and attacked from 5 different directions at once. The Zephyrian formation, designed to trap a single group of ships, suddenly found enemies everywhere they looked. When the destroyer Spartacus took critical damage, its captain did not order his crew to abandon ship. Instead, he aimed his dying vessel at the largest Zephyrian carrier and pushed his engines to maximum power. The Spartacus hit the carrier like a missile, destroying both ships in a massive explosion. But the sacrifice created a gap in the Zephyrian formation that Chen's other ships could exploit. Across the galaxy, human forces were demonstrating the same principles. They did not rely on superior technology or overwhelming numbers. Instead, they used intelligence, creativity, and a willingness to take risks that other species found insane. On New Carthage, General Sarah Voss coordinated the defense of an entire planet with only 12,000 human marines. The Zephyrians had landed with 50,000 ground troops, expecting an easy victory. But Voss had been preparing for this moment for 3 months. Every building in the capital city had been turned into a fortress. Every street corner had been prepared as a defensive position. Most importantly, every human soldier knew exactly what to do without waiting for orders. "The Zephyrians think war is about technology and numbers," Voss explained to her officers over the radio. "But war is really about information and adaptation. And humans are very good at both." When Zephyrian forces attacked one position, human defenders would retreat to another position that was better prepared. When the enemy adapted to one type of defense, the humans would switch to a completely different approach. Private Johnson was a cook in civilian life, but when his platoon ran out of ammunition, he showed them how to make weapons from kitchen equipment found in abandoned restaurants. Sergeant Williams had been a teacher before the war, but she used her knowledge of human psychology to predict how Zephyrian commanders would react to different types of attacks. The secret of human warfare was not any single advantage. It was the fact that every human soldier was also a scout, an engineer, a tactician, and an inventor. While other species had soldiers who specialized in specific roles, humans had soldiers who could do whatever the situation required. Lieutenant Parker had studied Zephyrian language and culture in her spare time. When her unit captured enemy communication equipment, she was able to listen to Zephyrian radio chatter and provide intelligence about their plans. "The enemy commanders are getting frustrated," she reported to General Voss. "They keep saying that humans do not fight according to any logical system." Voss smiled. "That is exactly right. Logic is predictable. Predictable enemies are dead enemies." The Zephyrians had conquered 47 different species by being superior to each one in specific ways. They had better technology than some, larger numbers than others, and more experience than most. But they had never faced an enemy that refused to be superior in any single area. Instead, humans were adaptable in every area. When Zephyrian shields stopped human energy weapons, humans used kinetic weapons. When kinetic weapons were blocked, humans used explosives. When explosives were neutralized, humans used their bare hands. Most confusing of all, humans seemed to enjoy the challenge. Where other species became demoralized when their standard tactics failed, humans became more creative. They treated every problem as a puzzle to solve, and they smiled while solving it. High Admiral Kethvar received reports from all his commanders with growing confusion. His forces were winning individual battles, but they were losing control of the war. Every time they solved one human tactic, the humans invented 3 new ones. "How many different ways can one species fight?" he asked his staff. His intelligence officer had been studying human military history. "According to our analysis, Admiral, humans have been at war with each other for their entire recorded history. They have tried every possible method of combat." Kethvar realized with growing horror that his forces were not fighting a single enemy. They were fighting thousands of years of accumulated warfare experience, adapted and improved by a species that treated conflict as a natural part of existence. High Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship Dominion and stared at the tactical display with growing disbelief. His invasion fleet had conquered 47 different species across the galaxy. He understood warfare as a science of superior numbers, advanced technology, and psychological pressure to break enemy morale. But the humans were fighting like they took defeat as a personal insult. The planet New Carthage floated below his ship, its surface covered with the lights of human cities. Kethvar had brought 200 warships to crush the human colony, expecting the battle to last no more than a few hours. That had been 3 days ago. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "the human fleet is moving to engage us again." Kethvar looked at the approaching ships with frustration. Admiral Chen's battle group consisted of only 20 vessels, tiny compared to the massive Zephyrian force. By every logical calculation, the humans should have retreated or surrendered. Instead, they kept attacking. "They have lost half their ships," Kethvar muttered. "Why do they continue this pointless resistance?" His intelligence officer, Yethkar, had been studying human behavior since the war began. "Admiral, I believe they do not see it as pointless. Human military records show they have a concept called acceptable losses. They are willing to sacrifice ships and lives if it achieves a strategic goal." "What strategic goal?" Kethvar demanded. "They cannot possibly defeat us." The answer came in the form of human fighters swarming toward the Zephyrian formation. Each small ship carried only 2 crew members and enough weapons to damage a much larger vessel. But instead of attacking randomly, they moved with purpose, targeting specific systems on specific ships. Lieutenant Sarah Kim piloted her fighter directly toward a Zephyrian cruiser's communication array. Her targeting computer had been damaged in an earlier battle, so she had to aim manually. The cruiser's defensive guns fired at her, but Sarah flew her ship in an unpredictable pattern that made her impossible to hit accurately. She fired her missiles just before a Zephyrian energy beam clipped her fighter's wing. Her ship spun out of control, but her missiles found their target. The cruiser's communication system exploded, leaving it unable to coordinate with the rest of the fleet. "This is Kim," she radioed as her fighter crashed toward New Carthage's surface. "Target eliminated. Tell my mom I said hi." Similar scenes were playing out across the battle zone. Human pilots were treating their own lives as acceptable costs if it meant damaging enemy ships. What made it worse from Kethvar's perspective was that the humans seemed almost happy about it. Captain Rodriguez in the destroyer Indomitable was coordinating the fighter attacks while battling 3 Zephyrian cruisers at the same time. Her ship was outgunned and outmaneuvered, but she used every trick her crew had learned in 5 years of fighting together. "Target their weapon systems," she called to her gunners. "I don't care if we can't destroy them. I just want them to stop shooting for a few seconds." When Zephyrian adaptive shields began to resist her plasma cannons, Rodriguez switched to kinetic rounds. When those were deflected, she tried electromagnetic pulse weapons. When the electromagnetic pulses were blocked, her crew fired clouds of metallic chaff that confused enemy sensors. The Zephyrian cruisers could not adapt fast enough. Every time they adjusted their defenses to one type of attack, Rodriguez was already using something completely different. But the real battle was happening on New Carthage's surface. General Sarah Voss had turned the capital city into a three-dimensional maze of fortified positions, hidden tunnels, and prepared ambush sites. When Zephyrian ground forces landed, they found themselves fighting not just human soldiers, but the city itself. Colonel James Okafor led his Marines through underground passages that connected every major building in the city. When Zephyrian troops captured a street, the humans would appear behind them from basements and service tunnels. When the enemy tried to secure a building, human soldiers would attack from the floors above and below at the same time. Private Martinez had been a construction worker before joining the army. She had spent weeks preparing explosive charges in key buildings throughout the city. When Zephyrian forces occupied those buildings, she could detonate them remotely, collapsing entire structures on top of enemy troops. The beautiful thing about fighting in a human city, Martinez explained to her squad, is that we built it. We know every pipe, every wire, and every weak point. But the humans' greatest advantage was not their preparation or their technology. It was their ability to share information instantly across their entire force. While Zephyrian commanders relied on formal chains of command, human soldiers communicated with each other directly. Sergeant Kim spotted an enemy patrol moving toward a human position. She immediately radioed the information to every unit in the area. Within minutes, 3 different squads were moving to intercept the patrol from 3 different directions. When Lieutenant Park discovered that Zephyrian armor was vulnerable to attacks from below, every human soldier in the city knew about it within an hour. When Corporal Davis figured out how to jam Zephyrian communications, his technique was being used by dozens of other units before the day was over. The Zephyrians had superior individual soldiers, better weapons, and more advanced armor. But they were fighting as separate units following orders from distant commanders. The humans were fighting as a single organism with thousands of eyes and thousands of brains, all working toward the same goal. General Voss watched the battle unfold from her command center deep beneath the city. Her screens showed Zephyrian forces advancing through the streets, capturing building after building. To an outside observer, it looked like the humans were losing, but Voss was smiling. "Phase 1 complete," she announced to her staff. "Begin Phase 2. The Zephyrian advance had been exactly what she wanted. For 3 days, human forces had been retreating according to a careful plan, leading the enemy exactly where Voss wanted them to go. Now 50,000 Zephyrian soldiers were spread throughout the city, far from their landing zones and support equipment. "All units, execute mousetrap," Voss commanded. Throughout the city, human soldiers emerged from hiding places that the Zephyrians did not even know existed. Manhole covers lifted to reveal Marines with rocket launchers. Office buildings that seemed empty suddenly filled with snipers. Subway tunnels that had been sealed for weeks opened to release entire companies of human troops. The Zephyrians found themselves surrounded in the middle of enemy territory, cut off from supplies and reinforcements. Worse, they were fighting in an environment that the humans had designed specifically for this battle. High Admiral Kethvar watched from orbit as his ground forces were systematically destroyed. His ship's sensors could detect the individual battles happening throughout the city, but he could not help his soldiers. Every time he tried to provide fire support from space, human surface-to-air missiles forced his ships to retreat. "Admiral!" Yethkar reported with barely controlled panic. "We are receiving surrender requests from 12 different ground commanders." Kethvar could not believe what he was hearing. "Surrender? We have more ships, better weapons, and superior technology. How can we be losing to a species that has been in space for less than 200 years? The answer came from an unexpected source. Captain Rodriguez's destroyer Indomitable had been badly damaged in the fighting, its engines failing and its hull breached in dozens of places. Any reasonable captain would have ordered the crew to abandon ship. Instead, Rodriguez aimed her dying vessel directly at Kethvar's flagship. "This is Captain Rodriguez to all Zephyrian vessels," her voice came over the communication system. "You wanted to see how humans fight? This is how humans fight." The Indomitable's engines roared to maximum power as the destroyer accelerated toward the Dominion. Kethvar's ships fired everything they had at the approaching vessel, but Rodriguez's crew kept their ship on course even as explosions tore through the hull. At the last second, Kethvar realized what was happening. "Evasive maneuvers!" he screamed. But it was too late. The Indomitable struck the Dominion's command section like a missile, destroying both ships in a massive explosion that lit up the space around New Carthage. Kethvar survived the crash, but his flagship was dead in space. Around him, his remaining ships were retreating in disorder as more human reinforcements arrived from other systems. On the planet's surface, General Voss accepted the surrender of the last Zephyrian ground forces. The soldiers who had conquered 47 different species were laying down their weapons to a human general who had been outnumbered 4-1. "How?" the Zephyrian ground commander asked as he handed over his weapon. "How did you defeat us?" Voss looked at the alien officer with something that might have been sympathy. "You fought to conquer," she said. "We fought to protect our friends. There is a difference." The same meeting room where Marcus Chen had been laughed at 3 months ago was now filled with a very different kind of energy. The curved walls that had once echoed with sounds of alien amusement were now quiet with something that looked very much like respect. General Marcus Chen walked into the chamber wearing a uniform that showed the signs of recent battle. His left arm was in a sling from the fighting on Proxima Station, and there were new lines around his eyes that had not been there before the war. But he walked with the confidence of someone whose warnings had been proven correct. Chairman Vextar's crystal body flickered with colors that showed shame and regret. The towering being had called this emergency session of the Galactic Council not to discuss threats, but to discuss apologies. "General Chen," Vextar said, his voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, "the Council owes your species a debt that cannot be calculated." Around the chamber, alien beings that had once dismissed human concerns now sat in thoughtful silence. Ambassador Thylix from the Centauri Federation stood up, her 4 blue arms trembling slightly as she spoke. "General Chen," Thylix began, "3 months ago, I accused your species of seeing violence where none existed. I said that humans were too primitive to understand galactic politics." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I was wrong. We were all wrong." The sound that filled the chamber was not the clicking laughter that had greeted Marcus's warnings before. Instead, there were quiet acknowledgments in dozens of different alien languages, all expressing the same sentiment. They had underestimated humanity. Hive Queen Zakth rose from her position, her 6 legs carrying her massive insect-like body forward. When she spoke through her translator, her words were careful and respectful. "Human species showed warrior wisdom beyond our understanding," she said. "We thought strength came from technology and numbers. Humans showed us that strength comes from unity and adaptation." Marcus looked around the chamber at faces that were now paying attention to his every word. But he took no pleasure in being right. The war had cost too much. "The final casualty reports," he said, his voice steady, "show that we lost 37,000 human soldiers across all theaters of combat. The Zephyrian Empire lost over 800,000 troops and 2/3 of their fleet." The numbers hung in the air like a challenge. The humans had been outnumbered in every battle, outgunned in every engagement, and outmatched in technology by every measurement the galaxy understood. Yet they had won decisively. "How?" Ambassador Krelon from the Ashari Collective asked, his jellyfish-like form floating closer. Our computer models still cannot explain human victory. By every calculation, you should have lost. Marcus touched a control on his device, and holographic images filled the center of the chamber. But these were not battle plans or tactical analyses. Instead, they showed individual human soldiers helping wounded aliens, human engineers rebuilding damaged stations, and human diplomats negotiating surrender terms that were far more generous than galactic law required. "You want to know how we won?" Marcus asked. "We won because we were not fighting for conquest. We were fighting to protect our allies." He gestured to one of the images, which showed a human medic treating a wounded Centauri officer. Sergeant Williams could have left Commander Telvar to die when his ship was hit. Instead, she risked her own life to save him. That is not a tactical decision, that is a human decision. Another image showed human engineers working around the clock to restore power to an Ashari colony that had been damaged in the fighting. These volunteers worked for 18 hours straight to fix systems they had never seen before, for people who had called them primitive just weeks earlier. The chamber was completely silent now. Every being in the room was staring at the images with something approaching understanding. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "You thought war was about superior technology and overwhelming force. You thought peace came from treaties and trade agreements. But humans know something that you forgot during your thousands of years of civilization." He paused and looked directly at Chairman Vextar. "Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is what happens when people are willing to fight for each other." In the back of the chamber, a familiar figure stood up. High Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire wore the simple clothes of a prisoner, but his species had requested that he be allowed to speak at this gathering. "The human general speaks truth," Kethvar said, his voice carrying the weight of defeat. "My species conquered 47 worlds by being superior to our enemies in specific ways. We had better ships than some, more soldiers than others, more advanced weapons than most." He looked directly at Marcus. "But humans are not superior in any single way. Instead, they are adequate in every way. When we adapted our shields to stop their energy weapons, they used physical projectiles. When we blocked their missiles, they used explosives. When we stopped their explosives, they fought with their bare hands." Kethvar's voice grew quieter. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to enjoy the challenge. Every time we thought we had them beaten, they found a new way to fight. It was like fighting an entire galaxy of different species, all working together in perfect coordination. Ambassador Thylix leaned forward. "But how is this possible? No species can be expert in every type of warfare." Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. "You are right. No species can be expert in everything. But humans are not one species anymore. We are a combination of every challenge we have ever faced." He changed the holographic display to show Earth's history. For thousands of years, humans fought each other across every type of terrain, in every possible climate, using every weapon we could imagine. We learned from every victory and every defeat. We incorporated the best ideas from every enemy we ever faced. The images showed human soldiers using tactics from 100 different cultures, weapons adapted from dozens of different designs, and strategies that combined the best elements of countless military traditions. "When we joined the galactic community," Marcus continued, "we did not stop learning. We studied your militaries, your technologies, your methods of organization. We added your strengths to our own." Chairman Vextar's crystal body flashed with realization. "You were not just warning us about the Zephyrian attack. You were preparing to fight it." Marcus nodded. For 3 months, human forces practiced coordination with every allied military. "We studied Zephyrian tactics and developed countermeasures. We prepared for a war that everyone else thought would never come." "But why?" Hive Queen Zaxth asked. Why did you prepare to defend species that did not believe you? The answer came not from Marcus, but from General Sarah Voss, who entered the chamber still wearing her combat gear from the siege of New Carthage. Her uniform was dirty and torn, and she walked with a slight limp from a wound taken in the final battle. Because that is what friends do, Sarah said simply. Humans do not abandon allies just because those allies do not trust us yet. We protect them until they understand that they can trust us. She moved to stand beside Marcus. The Zephyrian Empire offered humanity very generous terms if we stayed neutral in this conflict. They promised us advanced technology, expanded territory, and favorable trade agreements. Sarah looked around the chamber at the alien beings who were now listening to every word. We rejected their offer without discussion, not because we were confident of victory, but because our friends were in danger. Ambassador Krelon floated forward. Even though we had insulted you, even though we had dismissed your warnings, Sarah's expression was gentle but firm. Especially because of that, friends do not abandon each other because of misunderstandings. They work through problems together. The chamber erupted in sounds that Marcus had learned to recognize as expressions of amazement and respect in dozens of different alien languages, but he held up his hand for silence. The Galactic Council needs to understand something important, Marcus said. This war is over, but humans will continue to watch for threats to our allies. We will continue to prepare for conflicts that others hope will never come. And we will continue to protect our friends, whether they ask us to or not. His voice carried a weight that made every being in the chamber pay attention. We tried to warn you because we respect you as allies. But understand this, we did not need your permission to defend our friends. We never have, and we never will. Chairman Vextar struck his crystal staff against the floor, calling for formal order. The Galactic Council officially recognizes the debt owed to humanity for their protection of Alliance worlds. How can we repay this debt? Marcus looked around the chamber one more time, then smiled. Stop laughing when we issue warnings. Start listening when we see threats. And remember that the galaxy is a dangerous place that requires constant vigilance to protect the peace we all enjoy. The council session ended with something that had never happened before in galactic history. Every species represented in the chamber stood and made their traditional gesture of respect toward the human delegation, not because they feared human military power, but because they finally understood what kind of beings they shared the galaxy with. As Marcus and Sarah left the chamber, Ambassador Thylix approached them. General Chen, General Voss, I have a question that my government needs answered. Sarah looked at the tall, blue-skinned alien with curiosity. What do you want to know? If another threat appears, Thylix asked, will humans protect us again? Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look that carried the weight of human history and the promise of human friendship. Then Marcus answered with words that would be remembered across the galaxy for generations to come. Ask us to stand with you, and we will stand. Ask us to fight beside you, and we will fight. Ask us to die for you, and we will die. He paused and his voice grew soft, but absolutely certain. But do not ask us to abandon you. That is something humans cannot do. The galaxy had learned to stop laughing at human alerts. Now they listened, and in listening, they learned that they had found something more valuable than superior technology or overwhelming force. They had found friends who would never let them stand alone.